The Montana winter of 1887 had been particularly brutal. Snow piled high against cabin walls, and temperatures plummeted so low that breath crystallized mid-air. It was against this unforgiving backdrop that Eliza Montgomery stepped off the train. At Wolf Creek Station, her entire life packed into 2 modest suitcases. She had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, a rancher named Thomas Blackwood, who had placed an advertisement seeking a respectable woman of good character and fortitude to be his wife. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the station master directed her to the Blackwood property, he avoided her eyes, his voice trailing off into uncomfortable silence. She arrived at the ranch to find not her intended husband, but a scene of carnage that would haunt her dreams forever. Thomas Blackwood and 4 ranch hands lay dead, their bodies arranged in a macabre tableau that suggested something more sinister than a simple robbery. Only one man survived, Thomas's childhood friend and business partner Samuel Reed, who claimed to know the terrible truth behind the massacre. But nothing in Samuel's story added up, and as Eliza found herself trapped at the remote ranch with a possible murderer, she began to uncover secrets about her would-be husband that made her question everything she thought she knew about the man she had traveled so far to marry. Eliza Montgomery had been corresponding with Thomas Blackwood for nearly 6 months. Their exchange began formally. His advertisement in the Boston Herald had been straightforward and businesslike, requesting a bride of sound constitution and moral virtue to join him on his Montana cattle ranch. Eliza, 26 and facing spinsterhood after her father's banking business collapsed, taking her dowry and prospects with it, had responded with equal pragmatism. "I possess the qualities you seek," she had written. "I am healthy, educated, and capable of managing a household. While I have no experience with ranch life, I am willing to learn and adapt." Over the months, their letters had evolved from practical discussions of household management and ranch operations to more personal revelations. Thomas shared stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the war, and the partnership he'd formed with his childhood friend Samuel to build what he described as the finest cattle operation in Wolf Creek Valley. Eliza told him about her love of literature, her skill with numbers that had helped her father's failing business stay afloat a few months longer than it might have otherwise, and her dreams of someday having children to raise in wide-open spaces far from Boston's crowded streets. By the time Thomas proposed marriage through the mail, enclosing a train ticket and $50 for new clothes befitting a rancher's wife, Eliza felt she knew him well enough to accept. What choice did she have, really? Her father had died of heart failure shortly after his financial ruin was complete. Her mother had preceded him to the grave years earlier. With no siblings and only distant relatives who viewed her as an unwelcome burden, Eliza packed her belongings, said goodbye to the city of her birth, and boarded a westbound train. The journey had been arduous. 7 days of constant motion, changing trains in Chicago, Omaha, and finally Helena before boarding the local line to Wolf Creek. She had slept poorly, eaten badly, and arrived exhausted but hopeful. Thomas had promised to meet her himself, but as she scanned the small station platform, she saw only the station master, a weathered man with a grey moustache and somber eyes. "Miss Montgomery?" he asked, approaching hesitantly. "Yes," she confirmed, straightening her spine despite her fatigue. "I'm here to meet Mr. Thomas Blackwood." The station master removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "I'm afraid there's been an incident at the Blackwood Ranch." Eliza's heart quickened. "What kind of incident? Is Mr. Blackwood unable to come?" "You might say that, miss." The station master cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's a wagon waiting to take you out there. Mr. Reed, that's Mr. Blackwood's partner, he asked me to make sure you got there safely." "I don't understand," Eliza said, clutching her reticule tighter. "What's happened?" The station master replaced his hat, avoiding her gaze. "It ain't my place to say, miss. Mr. Reed will explain everything." The wagon driver was as taciturn as the station master had been evasive. Despite Eliza's increasingly pointed questions, he offered nothing more than grunts and an occasional, "Mr. Reed will tell you." The journey took nearly 2 hours. The wagon rumbling over frozen ruts in the road, winding through snow-covered hills dotted with pine and spruce. When they finally crested a rise, Eliza caught her first glimpse of what was to have been her new home. The Blackwood Ranch spread across a sheltered valley, a large 2-story house built of sturdy logs and stone dominating the center of the property. A barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings formed a rough square around a central yard. In summer, Eliza imagined, it might be quite picturesque. But now, under leaden skies with wisps of smoke curling from the main house chimney, it looked foreboding. As they approached, Eliza noticed something else. A small crowd gathered near the bunkhouse, men on horseback, others standing in hushed groups, and something on the ground, covered with canvas tarps. The wagon had barely stopped when a tall man with copper-colored hair and a neatly trimmed beard strode toward them. He wore a heavy coat with a star pinned to its front. "Miss Montgomery?" he inquired, helping her down from the wagon with a gentle but firm hand. "I'm Sheriff Walker. I'm afraid you've arrived at a difficult time." "So I've gathered," Eliza replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Though no one seems willing to tell me exactly what's happened, I'm here to meet my fiancé, Thomas Blackwood." The sheriff's expression softened with unmistakable pity. "I'm very sorry to be the one to tell you this, ma'am, but Mr. Blackwood is dead, murdered, along with 4 of his ranch hands." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eliza's feet. She gripped the wagon for support, dimly aware of the driver removing her luggage. "Murdered," she repeated faintly. "How? When?" "Last night, as near as we can figure. Mr. Reed found them this morning when he returned from Helena." The sheriff gestured toward a man standing apart from the others, staring out over the snow-covered pasture. Even from a distance, Eliza could see that Samuel Reed was a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the weathered complexion of a man who spent his days outdoors. As if sensing their attention, he turned, and Eliza caught a glimpse of a strong-featured face dominated by piercing eyes. Mr. Reed was the only one spared, the sheriff continued, his voice dropping. "He was in Helena on business. Lucky for him, though some might consider it suspicious timing." "You suspect him?" Eliza asked, surprised by her own clarity of thought despite the shock. Sheriff Walker shrugged. "Whole town knows the partners had been disagreeing about the direction of the ranch. Reed wanted to expand, buy up neighboring properties. Blackwood was more cautious, especially after investing in those breeding bulls last fall. But Reed's got a solid alibi. Half of Helena saw him at the cattlemen's meeting yesterday, and he stayed at the Grand Hotel last night." "Clark confirms it," Eliza nodded, trying to process this information. The man she'd agreed to marry was dead, killed in some violent altercation. Her carefully laid plans had disintegrated in an instant. "What happens now?" she asked, practical concerns pushing through her shock. "I have no return ticket and very little money." Before the sheriff could answer, Samuel Reed approached, his stride purposeful. Up close he was even more imposing, well over 6 feet tall, with a physicality that suggested both strength and restraint. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-gray, like the winter sky reflected in ice. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice deeper than she had expected, with a subtle southern inflection. "I'm Samuel Reed, Tom's partner. I can't begin to express how sorry I am about these circumstances." Eliza accepted his outstretched hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard physical labor, despite his evident position as half-owner of a substantial ranch. "Mr. Reed," she acknowledged, "I understand you found them." A shadow crossed his face. I did. I returned from Helena earlier than expected. Had a feeling something wasn't right when I saw no smoke from the chimneys. He paused, seeming to consider how much to share. It wasn't a sight any person should have to witness, let alone a lady such as yourself. Sheriff Walker cleared his throat. Miss Montgomery was just asking about her situation, given the circumstances. Of course, Reed nodded. Miss Montgomery, I want you to know that Tom spoke of you often and with great admiration. He was eagerly anticipating your arrival. He hesitated before continuing. I know this isn't what you expected, but I hope you'll consider staying at the ranch house, at least until we've sorted through this tragedy. The housekeeper, Mrs. Larson, is there now, preparing a room for you. The house was untouched by the violence. Eliza's mind raced. Stay in the home of her murdered fiancé, with his business partner, a man the sheriff seemed to consider a potential suspect, despite his alibi. But what choice did she have? Her meager funds wouldn't cover a return ticket to Boston, and she had nothing to return to in any case. Thank you, Mr. Reed, she said finally. I would appreciate that kindness while I consider my options. Reed nodded, seemingly relieved. Mrs. Larson is a good woman, bit taciturn but reliable. She'll see to your comfort. He turned to the sheriff. Walker, I assume you're almost finished here? The sheriff nodded grimly. Doc's done his examination. We'll take the bodies into town. Funeral's likely the day after tomorrow, weather permitting. He glanced at Eliza. Unless you have other wishes, ma'am? The sudden responsibility startled her. What right did she have to make funeral arrangements for a man she'd never actually met? I defer to Mr. Reed's judgment in this matter, she said carefully. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Simple service at the church, then burial in the town cemetery, Reed decided. Tom wasn't much for elaborate displays. As they spoke, men were loading canvas-wrapped forms onto a wagon. Eliza found herself unable to look away. One of those shapes was Thomas Blackwood, the man whose letters had offered her a new beginning. Now he was gone, and she was stranded in an unfamiliar wilderness with strangers. I'd like to see him, she said suddenly, surprising even herself. Both. Men turned to her with matching expressions of concern. Miss Montgomery, the sheriff began gently. That might not be. I came 2,000 miles to marry him, Eliza interrupted, a steely determination replacing her shock. I may never have met him in person, but we shared our thoughts, our histories, our aspirations. I owe him this much at least. Reed and Walker exchanged glances, and something unspoken passed between them. Very well, Reed conceded. But I should warn you, Miss Montgomery, what was done to Tom and the others, it wasn't just murder, it was butchery. Eliza swallowed hard but held her ground. I understand. The sheriff led her to the wagon, where he pulled back a corner of canvas from one of the forms. Eliza steeled herself, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. Thomas Blackwood had been a handsome man. That much was clear, despite what had been done to him. His features matched the small tintype he had sent her, though they were now fixed in an expression of horror. But it was the manner of his death that caused Eliza to stifle a cry. Deep, jagged cuts crisscrossed his throat and chest. One arm was nearly severed at the shoulder. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, she whispered, unconsciously invoking prayers from her childhood. Whoever did this used something like an axe or cleaver, the sheriff said quietly. Same with all 5 of them. Looks like they were taken by surprise. Probably while they were eating dinner. We found plates still on the bunkhouse table, food untouched. Eliza nodded, committing Thomas's face to memory before the sheriff covered him again. Despite the grisly circumstances, she felt an odd sense of closure. The man in the letters now had a real face, even if it was in death. Thank you, she said softly, turning away from the wagon. Reed was waiting a respectful distance away. As Eliza approached, he offered his arm for support. "The house is this way, Miss Montgomery. I've had your belongings taken up already." The main house was impressive, far more substantial than Eliza had imagined from Thomas's descriptions. Built of massive logs with a stone foundation, it featured a wide porch wrapping around two sides and large windows that would admit plenty of light in better weather. Inside, it was surprisingly well appointed for a frontier home. Polished wood floors covered with quality rugs, a large stone fireplace dominating the main room, comfortable-looking furniture arranged in conversational groupings, Tom believed. "In comfort," Reed explained, noting her surprise. "Said a man works better when he has something pleasant to come home to." He hesitated before adding, "He was especially eager to make the house welcoming for you. Ordered new curtains from Denver last month." A plump, grey-haired woman appeared from what Eliza assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Her face was lined with age and worry, her expression guarded. "Mrs. Larson," Reed introduced her. "This is Miss Montgomery, Tom's intended." The housekeeper offered a small curtsy. "Miss, I've prepared the blue room for you. Dinner will be at 6, unless you prefer a tray in your room." "Thank you," Eliza replied, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. "I think I would prefer to rest before dinner." Mrs. Larson nodded and led Eliza upstairs to a pleasant bedroom decorated in shades of blue and cream. Her luggage waited beside a chest of drawers, and a fire burned cheerfully in a small fireplace. The bed looked invitingly comfortable after days of train travel. "There's hot water in the pitcher if you'd like to freshen up," Mrs. Larson said, her tone softening slightly. "I'll bring up some tea." Left alone, Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally overwhelming her. Thomas was dead. Her carefully constructed future had vanished. She was alone in a strange house in the wilderness, surrounded by people she didn't know, in the aftermath of a brutal crime. Yet strangely, she felt no impulse to weep. Perhaps the shock was still too fresh, or perhaps her years of self-reliance after her family's downfall had hardened her against life's cruel turns. Instead, she found herself analyzing her situation with pragmatic clarity. She had little money, no immediate prospects, and no home to return to. The ranch, presumably, would now belong entirely to Samuel Reed. She would need to find employment, perhaps as a teacher if the town had a school, or as a shopkeeper's assistant. First, though, she needed to understand exactly what had happened. Here, when Mrs. Larson returned with tea, Eliza asked the question that had been foremost in her mind. "Mrs. Larson, do you have any idea who might have wanted to harm Mr. Blackwood and his men?" The housekeeper's hands trembled slightly as she set down the tray. "It's not my place to speculate, miss." "Please," Eliza pressed. "I've come all this way to marry him. Surely I have some right to know about the circumstances of his death." Mrs. Larson's weathered face showed conflict, but finally she sighed and sat in a chair near the door. "Mr. Blackwood was a good employer, fair, treated his men well, but he had enemies, same as any successful man does in these parts." "What kind of enemies?" Eliza prompted, when the woman fell silent. "There's the Porter brothers, for one. Own the next ranch over. Been trying to buy this land for years, but Mr. Blackwood wouldn't sell at any price. Then there's Hollister, runs the saloon in town. Mr. Blackwood caught him watering down the whiskey, threatening to expose him." Mrs. Larson hesitated. "And there's been trouble with some of the men, Mr. Reed hired last autumn. Rough sorts, not like the usual ranch hands." "I thought Mr. Reed and Mr. Blackwood were partners," Eliza said, catching the implication. "Wouldn't they make hiring decisions together?" Mrs. Larson's expression closed off. "As I said, miss, it's not my place. Mr. Reed is a complicated man, but he and Mr. Blackwood were like brothers, despite their differences." She stood abruptly. "I should see to dinner. Ring the bell if you need anything before then." After the housekeeper left, Eliza sipped her tea thoughtfully. Mrs. Larson had offered several potential suspects, yet seemed reluctant to implicate Reed directly despite hinting at tensions between the partners. The sheriff, too, had mentioned disagreements about the ranch's future. Eliza moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. The sheriff and his men had departed with their grim cargo, but she could see Reed near the bunkhouse, deep in conversation with two rough-looking men. Something about his posture suggested tension, though at this distance she couldn't make out his expression. As if sensing her observation, Reed suddenly looked up toward her window. Their eyes met briefly before Eliza stepped back, an odd shiver running through her. There was something unsettling about Samuel Reed's intense gaze, something that made her wonder if the sheriff's suspicions might have merit despite the seemingly solid alibi. She turned away from the window, her practical nature reasserting itself. Speculation without evidence was pointless. She needed facts, and to get those, she would need to be clear-headed and observant. Thomas had often commented in his letters on her logical mind and keen insights. Now those qualities might help her understand the truth behind his death. Eliza unpacked her few belongings, changed into a fresh dress, and braided her dark hair neatly. By the time Mrs. Larson rang the dinner bell, she had composed herself and prepared a mental list of questions for Samuel Reed. If she was to remain at the Blackwood Ranch, even temporarily, she needed to understand the currents of danger that seemed to flow beneath its peaceful surface. The dining room continued the theme of surprising elegance, with a polished oak table that could seat 12, a crystal chandelier hanging above it, and a sideboard holding what appeared to be fine china and silver. Reed was already seated at the head of the table when Eliza entered, and he rose immediately, coming around to hold her chair. "I hope you were able to rest, Miss Montgomery," he said as she sat. "Today has been an ordeal I wouldn't wish on anyone." "It has certainly not been the arrival I anticipated," Eliza replied carefully, "but I'm grateful for your hospitality, Mr. Reed." Mrs. Larson served a simple but hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Despite her emotional turmoil, Eliza found herself hungry after days of poor train food. They ate in silence for several minutes before Reed spoke again. "I feel I should tell you more about what happened," he said, setting down his fork. "You deserve that much, having come all this way." Eliza nodded, watching his face carefully. "I would appreciate that." Reed's expression darkened. "I was in Helena for the Territorial Cattlemen's Association meeting. Should have been gone for 3 days, but I concluded my business early and rode back last night instead of waiting for morning. Got as far as Wilson's Creek before the snow picked up, so I stayed at the way station there." He paused, taking a sip of water as if steeling himself for what came next. "Arrived here around 9 this morning. Everything seemed quiet, too quiet. No smoke from the bunkhouse chimney, no men in the yards. I checked the house first, but found no one. Then I went to the bunkhouse." His knuckles whitened where they gripped his fork. Tom and the 4 hands, Mills, Donnelly, Martinez, and the new boy Carter, they were all arranged. "Arranged?" Eliza echoed, her food forgotten. Reed's blue-grey eyes met hers directly. "In a circle, Miss Montgomery, facing inward, like they'd been placed that way after death. Each with similar wounds, throat and chest cut multiple times with something heavy and sharp." He set down his utensils entirely. "In all my years on the frontier, I've never seen anything like it, not even during the war." "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Eliza asked, echoing her earlier question to Mrs. Larson. "Sheriff Walker seems to think I'm a prime candidate," Reed said with a bitter smile. "Despite witnesses placing me in Helena, and then at Wilson's Creek at the time, it must have happened. Why would he suspect you if you have an alibi?" Reed sighed. "Tom and I disagreed about some recent business matters. Nothing unusual. Partners often have different visions, but we had a heated discussion before I left for Helena. Several of the hands overheard it. What was the disagreement about? Eliza pressed. For a moment she thought he might refuse to answer, but then his shoulders slumped slightly. I wanted to borrow against the ranch to buy adjoining properties. The Porter land is available. Old man Porter died last month, and his sons want to sell. It's prime grazing land with reliable water. But Tom was cautious by nature. He'd invested heavily in those Hereford bulls last year, wanting to build up the herd before expanding further. It aligned with what both the sheriff and Mrs. Larson had told her, which lent credibility to Reed's account. But something still felt off, though Eliza couldn't quite identify what. Beyond the sheriff's suspicions, she continued, do you have any theories? Mrs. Larson mentioned the Porter brothers and someone named Hollister. Reed raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Larson has been talking, has she? Well, she's right that both have grievances against Tom. The Porters resented his success, and Hollister's been nursing a grudge since Tom called him out publicly about watering down his whiskey. He shook his head. But this wasn't a simple revenge killing. The arrangement of the bodies suggests something more deliberate, more planned. Could it have been Indians? Eliza asked, voicing a fear that had occurred to her during her journey. West? No, Reed said firmly. The local tribes have been peaceful for years. Besides, this wasn't their style of killing, and they'd have taken horses and supplies. Nothing was stolen, not even the cash box Tom kept in his desk. They fell silent as Mrs. Larson cleared the dishes and brought apple pie for dessert. After she retreated to the kitchen, Reed spoke again, his voice lower. Miss Montgomery, I want you to know that I intend to find whoever did this to Tom. He was more than my business partner. He was my oldest friend. We grew up together in Pennsylvania, fought in the same regiment during the war. I owe him my life twice over. His intensity was almost palpable. I've sent for a Pinkerton detective from Denver. In the meantime, I hope you'll consider this. Your home for as long as you need. The offer was generous, especially considering she had no claim on either Thomas or his property. Yet Eliza couldn't help wondering about Reed's motivations. Was it simple kindness, obligation to his dead partner, or something else? That's very kind, she said carefully, though I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Reed insisted. Tom would have wanted it. Besides, the truth is, I could use your help. At her questioning look, he continued, Tom kept the ranch. Books. I'm more comfortable with cattle than ledgers. From your letters he gathered you have a good head for numbers. So he had read her correspondence with Thomas. It wasn't entirely surprising. Partners in a business would naturally share important information, but it still felt like an intrusion. I do have some experience with bookkeeping, she acknowledged. My father was a banker before his business. And failed. Then it's settled, Reed said, as if the matter were decided. You'll stay at least until spring when travel is easier. You can help with the books, and in return you'll have a safe place to live while you decide your next steps. He hesitated before adding, and perhaps you can help me understand what really happened here. A fresh perspective might see things I'm missing. The proposition was logical enough, yet Eliza sensed layers beneath Reed's straightforward offer. Was he genuinely seeking her help, or did he want to keep her close for some other reason? If he had any involvement in Thomas's death, having her under his roof would allow him to monitor what she learned or suspected. Yet what choice did she have, really? No money, no connections in this wild territory, and winter closing in. At least, here she would have shelter, food, and perhaps the opportunity to discover the truth about Thomas Blackwood's murder. Very well, Mr. Reed, she said finally. I accept your offer, at least temporarily. Something like relief flashed across his features before his usual composed expression returned. Excellent. Tomorrow, After you've rested properly, I'll show you the office and the books." He stood, signaling the end of dinner. "I should warn you, though, Miss Montgomery. Whoever killed Tom and the others is still out there. Until we know who and why, it might be safest for you to remain close to the house." Was it a warning or a threat? Eliza couldn't be certain, but she nodded agreement. As Reed escorted her back to the staircase, she noticed a framed photograph she had missed earlier, two young men in Union Army uniforms, standing stiffly side by side. Even in the formal pose, the friendship between them was evident in their stance, shoulders touching, expressions serious but somehow unified. "Is that you and Thomas?" she asked, pausing to examine the image. Reed nodded, a genuine sadness crossing his face. "Taken in '63, just before Gettysburg. We were so damn young." The crude language slipped out, and he immediately apologized. "Forgive me, Miss Montgomery. Sometimes the past feels closer than it should." "What were you like then?" Eliza asked, curious despite herself. "You and Thomas." Reed studied the photograph, something distant in his gaze. Tom was the steady one, thoughtful, always planning 3 steps ahead. I was the hothead, first into a fight, quick to anger. A faint smile touched his lips. He saved me from my own recklessness more times than I can count, both during the war and after. The reminiscence seemed heartfelt, making it harder for Eliza to reconcile the man before her with someone who might have orchestrated his friend's murder. Yet she reminded herself that appearances could be deceiving. Samuel Reed remained an enigma, potentially her protector, possibly involved in Thomas's death, or maybe just another victim of circumstances beyond his control. "Good night, Mr. Reed," she said, starting up the stairs. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Good night, Miss Montgomery," he replied, watching her ascend. "And please, call me Samuel. I think, given our unusual circumstances, we can dispense with some formalities." Eliza nodded but did not reciprocate the invitation to use her given name. Some boundaries, she felt, were best maintained until she better understood the dangerous currents she had unwittingly waded into. Back in her room, Eliza stood again at the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. Somewhere in the darkness, surrounding this isolated ranch, was a killer, someone who had brutally murdered 5 men and arranged their bodies in some ritual fashion. Whether that person was one of the enemies Mrs. Larson had mentioned, Samuel Reed himself, despite his alibi, or some unknown threat, Eliza could not yet determine. What she did know was that her life had irrevocably changed. The safe, predictable future she had envisioned as Thomas Blackwood's wife had vanished. In its place was uncertainty, danger, and a mystery that seemed to deepen with every conversation. As she prepared for bed, Eliza made a silent promise to the man she had never met in life. She would discover the truth about his death, no matter where that truth led. Her logical mind, the quality Thomas had most admired in their correspondence, would be her greatest asset in navigating the perilous situation she now found herself in. And perhaps, in unraveling the mystery of Thomas Blackwood's murder, she might also find a new purpose for herself in this harsh but beautiful frontier. Sleep eluded Eliza that night, each creak of the house settling, each moan of the winter wind against the windows jolted her to alertness. Twice she rose to stoke the fire, unable to shake the bone-deep chill that seemed to emanate from more than just the Montana winter. Dawn arrived with soft gray light filtering through frost-covered windows. Eliza dressed quickly in her warmest attire, a practical wool skirt and blouse, overlaid with a knitted shawl. Her Boston clothes, she realized, were ill-suited to the harsh frontier winter. She would need to acquire more appropriate garments. If she was to remain here, Mrs. Larson had breakfast waiting when Eliza descended, hot coffee, flapjacks, and thick-cut bacon. To Eliza's surprise, Samuel Reed was absent. "Mr. Reed rode out at first light," Mrs. Larson explained, noticing Eliza's glance toward the empty chair. "Said to tell you he'd return by midday to show you the office. Meanwhile, I'm to help you. Get settled." The housekeeper's tone remained neutral, but Eliza detected a hint of warming toward her since the previous evening. "Thank you, Mrs. Larson," Eliza said, pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. "Perhaps you could show me around the house. If I stay, I should understand its works." The housekeeper nodded, and after breakfast led Eliza on a tour of the spacious home. The ground floor contained the formal dining room, a well-appointed parlor, a library stocked with surprisingly varied volumes, and a study that presumably doubled as the ranch office. The kitchen was modern by frontier standards, with a large cast-iron stove and ample workspace. A back staircase led up from the kitchen to the second floor, where 4 bedrooms and a small sitting room comprised the private quarters. "Mr. Blackwood's room is there," Mrs. Larson said, pointing to a closed door at the end of the hall, opposite the blue room where Eliza had slept. "No one's been in since—" She trailed off uncomfortably. "And Mr. Reed?" Eliza inquired casually. "Where are his quarters?" "He has a cabin about half a mile east of the main house," Mrs. Larson replied. "Said he preferred his privacy, though he takes most meals here and uses the office for business." Interesting, Eliza thought. The partners maintained separate living quarters despite their long friendship. Perhaps their different visions extended beyond business matters. "Mrs. Larson, how long have you worked for Mr. Blackwood?" Eliza asked as they returned downstairs. 5 years come spring," the housekeeper answered. "Came out from Chicago after my husband passed. Mr. Blackwood advertised for a housekeeper, same way he did for—" She hesitated, then finished awkwardly, "for a wife." "And in that time, did you notice any particular tensions between Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Reed, or with others in the area?" Mrs. Larson busied herself straightening items on a shelf, avoiding Eliza's gaze. "They disagreed sometimes. Like Mr. Reed told you. Business matters mostly, but lately—" She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "Lately it was different, more serious." "How so?" Eliza pressed. The housekeeper sighed, abandoning pretense. "Mr. Reed brought in those new men last fall. Rough types. As I mentioned, Mr. Blackwood didn't like it, said they weren't the sort he wanted associated with his ranch." She lowered her voice despite the empty house. "One night about a month ago, I overheard them arguing. Mr. Reed said something about bigger opportunities and not having the stomach for what's necessary. Mr. Blackwood told him if that's what he wanted, he should buy out his half of the ranch and go his own way." Eliza absorbed this information carefully. Did Mr. Reed want to leave the partnership? "Not likely," Mrs. Larson said with a bitter chuckle. "Mr. Reed put in sweat equity when they started, but most of the capital came from Mr. Blackwood. The ranch would fetch 5 times what they paid for it now, but I doubt Mr. Reed has that kind of money to buy out Mr. Blackwood's share. And Mr. Blackwood's will leaves everything to his sister back east." This new piece of information startled Eliza. His sister. He never mentioned a sister in his letters. Mrs. Larson looked equally surprised. "Miss Margaret. He spoke of her often. Lives in Philadelphia with her husband, a doctor. Strange he wouldn't mention her to his intended bride." Before Eliza could respond, the sound of horses outside drew their attention. Moving to the window, Eliza saw Samuel Reed dismounting alongside another man, tall, slender, and dressed in an expensive-looking coat that seemed out of place in the rugged surroundings. "That'll be the Pinkerton man," Mrs. Larson said, peering over Eliza's shoulder. "Mr. Reed must have ridden to the station to meet the morning train." Minutes later, Reed entered with his companion. Stomping snow from their boots in the entryway, the stranger removed his hat to reveal a lean face dominated by sharp, observant eyes and a precisely trimmed mustache. Unlike Reed, who exudes physical power, this man projected a different sort of authority, cerebral, calculating. "Miss Montgomery," Reed greeted her, "may I present Mr. Nathaniel Archer of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Mr. Archer, this is Miss Eliza Montgomery, who was engaged to marry Thomas Blackwood." The detective bowed slightly. "My condolences, Miss Montgomery. A terrible situation to arrive at." "Thank you, Mr. Archer," Eliza replied, studying him with undisguised interest. "I hope you can help uncover the truth about Mr. Blackwood's death." "That is my intention, madam," Archer said, his voice cultured and precise, suggesting Eastern education. "Mr. Reed has briefed me on the basic facts, but I would value hearing your observations as well when convenient." "Miss Montgomery only arrived yesterday," Reed reminded him, "after the bodies were removed." "Nevertheless," Archer countered smoothly, "fresh eyes sometimes notice what familiarity overlooks, and as Mr. Blackwood intended, she may offer insights into his state of mind through their correspondence." Reed looked as if he might object, but instead nodded curtly. "Mrs. Larson, could you prepare coffee for us in the study? Miss Montgomery, if you're ready, I can show you the office now, and perhaps afterward you might speak with Mr. Archer." The study proved to be a well-organized space, dominated by a large desk of polished oak. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on cattle breeding, land management, and territorial law, interspersed with what appeared to be personal journals. A cabinet contained various ledgers and files, all neatly labeled in a precise. "And Tom was methodical to a fault," Reed commented, noticing Eliza's appraisal of the orderly room. "Every receipt, every expense, every head of cattle logged and accounted for." He moved to the desk and opened the central drawer, extracting a leather-bound ledger. "This is the main accounting book. Records of all transactions, payroll, purchases, sales." He handed it to Eliza, who opened it carefully. The entries were indeed meticulous, recorded in a neat script she recognized from Thomas's letters. She leafed through the pages, scanning recent entries with a banker's daughter's practiced eye. "The last entry is from 3 days ago," she noted. "The day before the incident, a payment to someone named Wilson for winter feed." Reed nodded. "Tom must have made it just before." He left the sentence unfinished, but his expression darkened. "Miss Montgomery, I'd like your help reviewing these books, not just for the ranch operations moving forward, but because I wonder if there might be something in them that relates to what happened." "What do you mean?" Eliza asked. Reed hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "Tom was worried about something these past few weeks, spending more time with these books, checking figures repeatedly. When I asked what he was looking for, he was evasive." "You think he found financial irregularities?" "I'm not sure," Reed admitted, "but it seems a strange coincidence that he was killed just days after I noticed this behavior." A soft knock interrupted them as Mrs. Larson entered with a tray bearing coffee and cookies. Reed thanked her and waited until she had departed before continuing. "There's something else you should know," he said, voice still low. "Something I haven't told Sheriff Walker or even Archer yet." He moved to a landscape painting on the wall and swung it aside to reveal a small wall safe. Dialing the combination, he opened it and removed an envelope. "I found this yesterday after the sheriff left. It was hidden in a compartment beneath Tom's desk drawer." Reed handed the envelope to Eliza. It was addressed simply to Reed in Thomas's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a brief note. "Reed, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. The discrepancies I've found suggest someone close to our operation is involved in something dangerous. Trust no one until you verify Porter's claim about the North Valley site. The surveyor's report is hidden where we camped that first winter, Tom. What does it mean?" Eliza asked, rereading the cryptic message. "What discrepancies? And what about the North Valley?" Reed shook his head, genuine confusion evident in his expression. "I don't know. Old man Porter approached Tom about 2 months ago, wanting to meet privately. Tom never told me what they discussed. As for the North Valley, it's a remote section of the ranch, nearly inaccessible in winter. We camped there when we first arrived in Montana before building this house." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "I plan to ride up there today, but with the snow and Archer's arrival, it will have to wait." Eliza studied Reed's face, trying to gauge his sincerity. Either he was truly baffled by Thomas's note, or he was an exceptional actor. The message implied Thomas had suspected danger from someone close to our operation, which could certainly include Reed himself. Yet Reed had voluntarily shown her the note, which seemed an odd choice if he was involved in Thomas's death. "Why? Show me this," she asked directly. "Why not the sheriff or Mr. Archer?" Reed considered the question. "Because Tom trusted you," he said finally, "enough to ask you to travel across the country to marry him, and because I need someone I can trust too. Walker suspects me despite my alibi, and Archer works for whoever pays him, but you have no reason to protect anyone involved in this. Your only loyalty is to finding the truth about what happened to Tom." His logic was sound, yet Eliza remained cautious. "I'll help review the books," she agreed, "and I'll keep this note confidential for now, but I reserve judgment about what it means until we have more information." Reed nodded, seeming satisfied with her response. "Fair enough. Now, I believe Archer is waiting to speak with you." The Pinkerton detective had made himself comfortable in the parlor, notebook in hand, a cup of coffee steaming on the table beside him. He rose as Eliza entered, waiting for her to be seated before resuming his own chair. "Miss Montgomery," he began without preamble, "I understand your relationship with the deceased was conducted entirely through correspondence. Might I ask how long you had been writing to each other?" "6 months," Eliza replied. "Since last June." "And in that time, did Mr. Blackwood ever express concerns for his safety, mention enemies or threats?" Eliza considered the question carefully. "Not explicitly. He mentioned business rivals, the Porter family most prominently, but never in terms that suggested personal danger." Archer made a note. "According to Mr. Reed, you are a cautious man by nature. Would you agree with that assessment based on your correspondence?" "Yes," Eliza nodded. "He was methodical in his thinking, careful with his plans. It was one of the qualities that—" She paused, surprised by a sudden constriction in her throat. "That made me believe he would be a reliable husband." The detective's gaze softened momentarily. "Of course. My apologies for reopening fresh wounds." He cleared his throat. Mr. Reed also mentioned that Blackwood had recently seemed preoccupied with the ranch accounts. "Did he ever mention financial concerns in his letters?" "No," Eliza said firmly. "In fact, he often spoke of the ranch's prosperity. The new breeding stock he purchased last fall was quite expensive, but he described it as an investment in the future, not a financial strain." "Interesting," Archer murmured, making another note. "One final question for now, Miss Montgomery. Did Mr. Blackwood ever mention his sister in Philadelphia?" The question caught Eliza off guard, though she'd just learned of Margaret's existence from Mrs. Larson. "No," she admitted. "He never mentioned any family still living." The detective's eyebrows rose slightly. "Curious omission, wouldn't you say, for a man corresponding with his future wife?" Before Eliza could respond, the front door burst open, admitting a blast of cold air and a snow-dusted Sheriff Walker. His normally composed face was taut with tension. "Reed!" he called sharply, then stopped short upon seeing Eliza and Archer in the parlor. "Pardon, Miss Montgomery. Where's Reed?" "In the study, I believe," Eliza replied, rising. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" Walker hesitated, then apparently decided she would learn the news soon enough. One of the hands from the Carson ranch just found Jed Porter dead in his barn. Throat cut, same as Blackwood and his men. Archer was on his feet immediately. When? Last night, by the look of it, Walker said grimly. His brother Richard reported him missing this morning when he didn't show up for breakfast. Carson's man found him an hour ago while delivering some papers to Porter Place. Footsteps sounded in the hallway as Reed emerged from the study, clearly having overheard. "Jed Porter?" he repeated incredulously. "Are you sure it was the same method?" Walker nodded. "Same type of wounds, though he wasn't arranged like your men were. Just left where he fell." His eyes narrowed. "Where were you last night, Reed?" Reed's jaw tightened. "Right here, Sheriff. Mrs. Larson can confirm I didn't leave the house after dinner. As can Miss Montgomery, whose room is directly across from the staircase. I would have had to pass her door to exit the house." All eyes turned to Eliza expectantly. She realized with a jolt that Reed was asking her to provide him an alibi, though she had no way of knowing if he had actually remained in the house all night. The back stairs from the kitchen would have allowed him to leave without passing her door. Yet if Reed was involved in the Porter murder, why draw attention to her as a potential witness? It would make more sense to simply claim he had been in his cabin, where no one could verify his whereabouts. "I was awake much of the night," she said carefully. "The house makes unfamiliar sounds, and recent events have left me unsettled. I heard no one in the hall." It wasn't exactly confirming Reed's alibi, but neither was it disputing his claim. Walker seemed to accept her statement with a curt nod. "I need to speak with Mrs. Larson," he said. "Then I'll ride out to Porter Place. Archer, you're welcome to accompany me if your employer approves." He cast a pointed glance at Reed. "By all means," Reed agreed. "That's why I brought Mr. Archer here, to investigate these murders. The more he sees, the better." After Walker and Archer departed to question Mrs. Larson, Reed turned to Eliza with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked, meeting his gaze steadily. "For not saying you specifically didn't hear me in the hallway. Walker already suspects me. If you had said you were awake all night and heard nothing, he might have taken that as evidence I snuck out." "Did you?" Eliza asked directly. "Leave the house last night?" Reed held her gaze. "No, Miss Montgomery, I did not. I was in my room, reviewing papers Tom left in the study. I have no reason to harm Jed Porter or anyone else." Eliza studied him, wishing she could discern the truth in his steady, blue-gray eyes. "Mr. Porter's death changes things, doesn't it? If the same killer is responsible, it suggests a connection between his death and what happened here." "Yes," Reed agreed, his expression thoughtful. "And it means Tom's note takes on new significance. He mentioned Porter specifically, said to verify his claim about the North Valley." He lowered his voice. "Now, both Tom and Porter are dead, and neither can tell us what that claim was." "The surveyor's report might," Eliza pointed out. "The one Thomas said was hidden at your old campsite." Reed nodded. "I'll head up there tomorrow at first light. The valley is treacherous in winter. Steep trails, risk of avalanche. Better to have a full day for the journey." He hesitated. "Perhaps you should come with me." The invitation surprised her. "Why?" "Because I'm not convinced you're safe here," Reed said bluntly. "Two men connected to whatever Tom discovered are already dead. If the killer is targeting anyone who knows about the North Valley situation, you might be at risk if left alone." "But I don't know anything about it," Eliza protested. "The killer might not be certain of that," Reed countered, "and I'd rather not risk your safety. Besides, a second pair of eyes might help locate Tom's hiding place. It's been years since we camped there." Eliza weighed her options. Remaining at the ranch alone might indeed be dangerous if Reed's theory was correct. Yet traveling to a remote valley with a man she barely knew, a man the sheriff considered a suspect despite his alibis, carried its own risks. "I'll consider it," she said finally. After I've had more time to review the ledgers, perhaps they contain some clue about these discrepancies Thomas mentioned. Reed accepted her non-committal response with a nod. Fair enough. But whatever. You decide. Be cautious. Don't mention Tom's note or the North Valley to anyone. Not Walker, not Archer, not even Mrs. Larson. After Reed left to oversee the remaining ranch hands' afternoon duties, Eliza returned to the study. She spent hours poring over the meticulously kept ledgers, searching for any irregularity that might have concerned Thomas. As the short winter day waned toward darkness, her eyes grew tired from the strain of deciphering entries in the dim lamplight. She was about to stop for the evening when a small discrepancy caught her attention. In the record of cattle sales from the previous autumn, Thomas had noted 179 head to Billings Stockyard, Septurn 7, but in the corresponding receipt, carefully pasted into the ledger, the number was 159. A difference of 20 cattle might be significant in terms of value, but it seemed an odd thing for Thomas to be so concerned about that he would leave Reed the cryptic note. Turning back several pages, she found another small inconsistency, a payment to a supplier that was recorded in the ledger as $342.50, but the receipt showed $442.50. Again, a noticeable sum, but hardly worth risking one's life over. Yet Thomas's note had mentioned discrepancies plural, suggesting these weren't isolated incidents. Determined, Eliza began a more systematic review, noting each instance where the ledger entry didn't precisely match the accompanying documentation. By the time Mrs. Larson called her for dinner, she had identified 7 such discrepancies over the past 6 months. None were particularly large on their own, but together they represented nearly $2,000, a substantial sum. More intriguingly, all involved transactions where Reed had signed the receipts in Thomas's absence. As she made her way to the dining room, Eliza's mind raced. Were these simple clerical errors? Deliberate falsifications? And if the latter, what did they have to do with the North Valley or Jed Porter? The connection remained elusive, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that understanding these financial irregularities was key to unraveling the mystery of Thomas's death. She was so preoccupied with these thoughts that she nearly collided with Nathaniel Archer in the hallway. The detective steadied her with a light touch to her elbow. "Pardon me, Miss Montgomery," he said. "I was just coming to find you. I've returned from the Porter farm and hoped I might have another word." "Of course," Eliza replied, gesturing toward the parlor. "Although Mrs. Larson has called us to dinner. Perhaps afterward?" "This won't take long," Archer assured her, following her into the parlor. Once they were seated, he leaned forward slightly. "Miss Montgomery, I wonder if Mr. Blackwood ever mentioned survey work in his letters, particularly regarding the northern section of the ranch?" The question was too closely aligned with what she and Reed had just discussed to be coincidental. Had Reed shared Thomas's note with Archer after all? Or had the detective uncovered the connection between the North Valley and Jed Porter through his investigation at the Porter farm? Deciding caution was warranted, Eliza shook her head. "No, Mr. Archer. Our correspondence focused primarily on domestic matters and general ranch operations. He rarely discussed specific land parcels." Archer studied her face, as if trying to detect deception. "I see. It's just that Richard Porter mentioned his brother had been quite agitated about something discovered in that area. A mineral deposit, perhaps, or some other valuable resource." "Mineral deposit?" Eliza echoed, genuinely surprised. "I thought this was cattle country." "Primarily, yes," Archer nodded, "but Montana Territory has seen its share of mining operations. Gold, silver, copper. The landscape is rich with possibilities." He paused, eyes never leaving her face. "Richard, Porter believes his brother may have been killed because of something he discovered on Blackwood Reed land, something valuable enough to kill for. The implication hung in the air between them. If something valuable had been discovered on the ranch, it provided a potential motive for Thomas's murder, one that would benefit Reed enormously, as he would inherit half the ranch's value as the surviving partner, with the other half going to Thomas's sister in Philadelphia. Before Eliza could formulate a response, Mrs. Larson appeared in the doorway. "Dinner is served," she announced. "Mr. Reed is already seated." "Thank you for your insights, Miss Montgomery," Archer said, rising smoothly. "We'll continue our conversation another time." As they moved toward the dining room, Eliza's mind whirled with new possibilities. The North Valley, a valuable discovery, financial discrepancies, Thomas's cryptic warning, Jed Porter's murder. How did these pieces fit together? And more importantly, who could she trust to help her assemble the puzzle? Samuel Reed awaited them at the head of the table, his expression guarded as he observed Archer and Eliza entering together. For a fleeting moment, Eliza thought she detected something like suspicion in his eyes before his features smoothed into a cordial host's welcome. "I trust your visit to the Porter place was informative, Mr. Archer?" Reed inquired, as Mrs. Larson served the first course. "Quite," the detective replied, "though I find myself with more questions than answers. A common state in my profession, unfortunately." As the dinner conversation continued on safer topics, Eliza made her decision. Tomorrow, she would accompany Reed to the North Valley. Whatever secrets lay hidden in that remote location, she was determined to uncover them, even if doing so placed her in the path of a killer who had already claimed 6 lives. Dawn broke with bitter cold and a sky promising more snow. Eliza dressed. In her warmest clothes, supplemented by a heavy coat, gloves and boots Mrs. Larson had provided, items left behind by Thomas's previous housekeeper. They were slightly too large, but would protect her from the elements better than her city attire. She descended to find Samuel Reed in the kitchen, packing provisions into a small knapsack. He wore practical wilderness gear, a sheepskin coat, buckskin gloves, and a hat with fur-lined ear flaps. A rifle leaned against the wall nearby. "You decided to come," he observed, looking up at her entrance. "I did," Eliza confirmed. "If Thomas hid something important enough to die for, I want to know what it is." Reed nodded, seemingly pleased with her decision. "Mrs. Larson prepared coffee and biscuits for us. We should eat before we leave. It's a 4-hour ride to the North Valley. In good conditions, longer with the snow." As they ate, Eliza noted the absence of both Mrs. Larson and Nathaniel Archer. "Where is everyone?" she asked. "Mrs. Larson drove into town for supplies," Reed explained. "Archer left at first light, said he wanted to interview Richard Porter again." His expression grew serious. "I told them both we were checking fence lines on the south pasture, the opposite direction from where we're actually going. Safer that way." The mention of safety reminded Eliza of the danger they potentially faced. "Do you think whoever killed Thomas and Jed Porter might still be watching the ranch?" Reed shrugged, his hand unconsciously moving to the pistol holstered at his hip. "I can't discount the possibility, but we'll be careful, avoid the main trails where we can." They departed as the sun crested the eastern hills, riding west before doubling back north through a series of narrow valleys. Reed set a steady pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure Eliza was managing the challenging terrain. The heavy silence of winter enveloped them. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, only the crunch of their horses' hooves breaking through the crusted snow. "You ride well," Reed commented after they had navigated a particularly steep incline. "Tom mentioned you grew up in the city." "My father believed in a well-rounded education," Eliza replied. "He arranged riding lessons when I was young, before his financial troubles began." She paused before adding, "Thomas mentioned you two grew up together in Pennsylvania." Reed nodded, features softening at the memory. "Small town outside Pittsburgh. Our fathers worked in the same steel mill. Tom was the foreman, mine a laborer, but we became friends anyway." His eyes grew distant. "We were inseparable as boys. Joined the Union Army together at 17, fought side by side at Gettysburg and Cold Harbor." "And afterward?" Eliza prompted. "How did you end up in Montana?" "Tom's uncle left him a small inheritance. Not enough to make him wealthy, but enough to start fresh after the war. We were both tired of the smoke and noise of Pennsylvania, wanted open spaces, a chance to build something with our own hands." He gestured at the snow-covered landscape around them. "Came out here in '68, worked odd jobs while scouting locations, bought the initial property in '70. The timeline matched what Thomas had shared in his letters, but added context about their shared past. "It sounds like you were closer than most brothers," Eliza observed. Reed's jaw tightened. "We were," he said quietly, "which is why I intend to find whoever took his life." They rode in silence for the next hour, the terrain growing increasingly rugged. The trail narrowed to barely a game path, winding between towering pine trees and massive granite outcroppings. Finally, they emerged into a sheltered valley, smaller than the one housing the ranch, but beautiful in its pristine solitude. A frozen stream cut through its center, and steep cliffs protected it from the harshest winds. "This is it," Reed announced, dismounting. "We camped near that rock formation." He pointed to a distinctive outcropping, shaped vaguely like a bear's head. "Built a lean-to against it for shelter that first winter while we were surveying the territory." Eliza climbed down from her horse, grateful to stretch her legs after the long ride. "Where would Thomas have hidden the surveyor's report?" Reed frowned, scanning the area. "Hard to say. It's been years since we used this camp. The lean-to is long gone." He secured the horses to a low-hanging branch and retrieved the rifle from his saddle. "Let's start with the rock formation itself. Might be a natural crevice or hollow Tom remembered." They spent the next hour combing the area around the bear-shaped outcropping, searching for any sign of a hiding place. The cold penetrated even their heavy clothing, numbing fingers and toes. Eliza's city-bred stamina began to flag, but she pressed on, determined not to show weakness. "Nothing," Reed finally declared, frustration evident in his voice. "If Tom hid something here, he chose a damn good spot." Eliza surveyed the valley thoughtfully. "If I were hiding something important," she mused, "I wouldn't choose the most obvious landmark. It would be somewhere memorable to me personally, but not apparent to others." Reed considered her words, then suddenly snapped his fingers. "The lightning tree," he exclaimed. "There was a massive pine that got struck during our first week here. Split right down the middle, but kept growing. Tom said it reminded him of the country after the war, broken but resilient." He strode purposefully toward the northern end of the valley, Eliza following close behind. After a few minutes, they came upon the tree Reed had described, an enormous pine with a jagged scar running its entire length, the two halves growing at slightly different angles from each other. "This has to be it," Reed muttered, approaching. The split trunk. He ran his gloved hands along the rough bark, searching for any sign of disturbance. "There must be a hollow or a—" He broke off as his fingers found a small, unnatural opening in the scar tissue. "Got something." Reed worked his hand carefully into the crevice, face tense with concentration. A moment later, he withdrew a metal tube about 12 inches long, the kind used by surveyors and architects to protect important documents. It was sealed at both ends and showed signs of weathering, but appeared intact. "Is that it?" Eliza asked, stepping closer. "The surveyor's report." Reed nodded, breaking the seal on one end of the tube and carefully extracting a rolled document. He unfolded it with equal care, revealing a detailed map of the Blackwood Reed Ranch and surrounding territories. annotated with handwritten notes. Both Eliza and Reed leaned in to examine it. "This is a geological survey," Reed murmured, finger tracing the contour lines. "Commissioned last September by the look of the date." Eliza searched the neat markings, trying to make sense of the technical notations. "What are those symbols in the North Valley section?" she asked, pointing to a cluster of markings near their current location. Reed's expression changed subtly as he studied the area she indicated. "Coal," he said softly. "High-grade anthracite if these readings are accurate." His finger moved to more markings extending beyond the ranch's northern boundary. And here, a substantial deposit spanning at least 3 properties, ours. The Porter land and the unclaimed territorial section beyond. "Coal," Eliza repeated, the pieces suddenly falling into place. "That's what Jed Porter discovered. That's what Thomas meant by Porter's claim about the North Valley." Reed nodded. Slowly, his gaze still fixed on the map. With the Northern Pacific Railroad pushing west, coal like this would be worth a fortune. Fuel for locomotives, for industry. "We're sitting on millions." His voice dropped to a near whisper. God almighty, no wonder Tom was killed. The implications hung between them. A coal deposit of this magnitude would transform the value of the land it sat beneath. The Blackwood Reed Ranch, already successful as a cattle operation, would be worth exponentially more with confirmed coal reserves. "The Porter brothers wanted to sell their land," Eliza recalled, "and you wanted to buy it, but Thomas refused." Reed's eyes snapped to hers, suddenly guarded. "I wanted to expand our grazing territory. I had no idea about this coal deposit." "But someone did," Eliza pressed. "Someone who knew the land contained coal and wanted to acquire it before that fact became public knowledge." She paused, a new thought occurring. "The discrepancies I found in the ledgers, could they be connected? Someone siphoning money to purchase nearby properties secretly?" Reed's expression darkened. "What discrepancies?" Eliza hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. If Reed was involved in Thomas's death, telling him about her discoveries might put her in danger, yet if he was innocent, he deserved to know. "Several transactions over the past 6 months don't match their receipts," she explained carefully. "Cattle sales, supply purchases, small amounts individually, but significant in total. And you think I'm responsible," Reed stated flatly, "because I signed most of those receipts." Before Eliza could respond, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley. Reed grunted and staggered, clutching his upper arm as blood blossomed against his coat sleeve. "Get down!" he shouted, grabbing Eliza and pulling her toward the shelter of the split tree. Another shot splintered bark inches from where they crouched. "Give me the map and the girl, Reed," a voice called from the ridgeline above them. "Do that, and I might let you live." Eliza peered cautiously around the tree trunk, trying to locate the shooter. A movement on the western ridge caught her eye, a man with a rifle partially concealed behind a boulder. "Richard Porter," Reed hissed, his face contorted with pain as he pressed his hand against his wounded arm. Tom suspected he was behind the financial irregularities. Must have been embezzling ranch funds to buy land parcels over the coal deposit. "But you said the Porter brothers wanted to sell their land," Eliza whispered, confused. "A ruse," Reed grimaced. "Richard likely killed his brother Jed when he discovered the coal and refused to participate in whatever scheme Richard had concocted." He extracted his pistol with his uninjured hand. "We need to get back to the horses. I'll create a diversion. When I fire, you run for the tree line to the east. Stay low, move fast." The plan had barely left his lips when another shot rang out, this one from behind them. Richard Porter cried out in surprise and pain, toppling forward from his position. On the ridge, Nathaniel Archer emerged from the trees to their right, rifle raised cautiously as he approached Porter's fallen form. After confirming the man was dead, he turned toward Reed and Eliza. "Are you hit badly, Reed?" he called, making his way down the slope. "Flesh wound," Reed replied, though his pallor suggested the injury was more serious than he claimed. "How? Did you find us?" Archer reached their position, his expression grim. "Followed you from the ranch. Mrs. Larson never left for town. Porter was holding her hostage in the root cellar. He forced her to tell him where you'd gone this morning." He glanced at the map still clutched in Reed's hand. "I take it that's what all this killing has been about." "Coal," Eliza confirmed. "A major deposit running through multiple properties." Archer nodded, as if this confirmed his suspicions. "Porter's been buying up land parcels throughout the territory, using various proxies. I found documentation at his farm proving he'd embezzled nearly $20,000 from various business partners over the past 5 years. The detective handed Reed a handkerchief to bind his wound. He must have discovered the coal deposit months ago and been positioning himself to control as much of it as possible. And when Thomas found discrepancies in the books, Eliza continued, the picture becoming clearer, he became a threat to Porter's scheme. "Yes," Archer agreed. "Blackwood was killed to silence him, and the ranch hands were collateral damage, witnesses, who couldn't be left alive." Porter likely arranged the bodies in that ritual fashion to make the killings seem like the work of a lunatic, diverting suspicion from himself. "And Jed Porter?" Reed asked, wincing as he tightened the makeshift bandage. "Probably discovered his brother's involvement and threatened to expose him," Archer surmised. Richard couldn't allow that. Eliza processed this information. Relief washing over her as the mystery's solution became apparent. So Thomas was killed because he discovered the financial irregularities and was close to exposing Richard Porter's scheme. "It appears so," Archer confirmed, helping Reed to his feet. "We should get back to the ranch. That wound needs proper attention, and we need to inform Sheriff Walker about Porter's involvement." As they made their way back to the horses, Eliza found herself watching Reed with lingering uncertainty. His explanation about wanting to buy the Porter land for grazing had seemed sincere, yet doubt remained. Had he truly been ignorant of the coal deposit? Or had he been working with Richard Porter only to be double-crossed? Reed caught her questioning gaze and held it steadily, despite his obvious pain. "I didn't know, Eliza," he said quietly. "About the coal, about Porter's embezzlement. None of it. I would never have betrayed Tom that way." Something in his eyes, vulnerability perhaps, or simple exhaustion, convinced her of his sincerity. Thomas had trusted this man for decades. Through war and the challenges of carving a life from the wilderness, perhaps she could trust him too. "I believe you," she said finally. "And I think Thomas would want his partner to develop this discovery, to build the legacy you both dreamed of." Reed's expression softened with visible relief. "And what about you?" he asked. "Will you stay at least until spring? The ranch needs someone with your head for figures, especially now." Eliza considered the question as they mounted their horses for the journey home. The life she had imagined. With Thomas was gone forever, but perhaps a different future awaited her in this harsh but beautiful land. One where she might help build something lasting from the foundation Thomas had left behind. "Yes," she decided, "I'll stay." The winter sky had begun to clear as they rode from the valley, pale sunlight glinting off the pristine snow. Ahead lay uncertainty, the challenge of healing wounds both physical and emotional, and the complex task of bringing Thomas's killers to justice. But for the first time since arriving in Montana, Eliza felt something like hope stirring within her, a sense that perhaps she had found her place after all, in this wild country so far from where her journey had begun. 3 weeks passed. February settled over Wolf Creek Valley with its full Arctic fury, bringing howling blizzards that confined everyone to the ranch house for days at a time. Reed's wound healed slowly but steadily under Mrs. Larson's capable care, though he remained paler than usual and tired easily. Sheriff Walker had arrested 2 of Richard Porter's associates, ranch hands who had helped him embezzle funds and later assisted in covering up Thomas's murder. Their testimony confirmed what Archer had pieced together. Porter had discovered the coal deposit months earlier and devised an elaborate scheme to acquire all the land above it before news of the discovery became public. Thomas's funeral had been a simple affair in the Wolf Creek Church, attended by nearly everyone in the small community. Eliza had been touched by the genuine grief displayed by those who had known him, reinforcing her sense that she would have found happiness with the thoughtful, principled man whose letters had brought her west. The matter of Thomas's will had been settled swiftly. As expected, his sister Margaret inherited his half of the ranch, while Reed retained his partnership share. An unexpected codicil, however, had named Eliza as the beneficiary of a modest trust fund Thomas had established to provide for her future security, whether as my wife or in pursuit of her own path. The gesture had moved her deeply, confirming Thomas's consideration extended beyond mere correspondence. On this particular morning, Eliza sat in the study, composing a letter to Margaret Blackwood in Philadelphia. The 2 women had exchanged several telegrams since Thomas's death, and Eliza had been surprised by Margaret's warmth and obvious affection for her brother. Now they were planning to meet when travel became feasible in the spring. A knock at the open door drew her attention. Reed stood there, arms still in a sling, but looking stronger than he had in days. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Not at all," Eliza replied, setting aside her pen. "I'm just writing to Margaret about the coal discovery and what it might mean for the ranch's future." Reed nodded and entered, settling into the chair opposite her desk, Thomas's desk, though she had come to think of it as her own these past weeks. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss. Archer's heading back to Denver tomorrow, and I've been considering his advice about how to proceed with the coal deposit. Since the confrontation in the North Valley, Nathaniel Archer had remained at the ranch, partly to fully document the case against Porter's accomplices, and partly because the continuing snowstorms had made travel difficult. His expertise had proven invaluable as they assessed the implications of the coal discovery. "What did he recommend?" Eliza asked. "That we partner with a reputable mining operation rather than try to develop the deposit ourselves," Reed explained. "Neither of us knows anything about coal extraction, and it would require substantial capital investment." He ran his hand through his dark hair, a gesture Eliza had come to recognize as a sign of thoughtful consideration. "Margaret has agreed, by telegraph at least. She'll retain her share of both the ranch and any mining proceeds, but leave the management decisions to us." The casual "us" caught Eliza's attention. Over the past weeks, Reed had increasingly included her in discussions about the ranch's future, valuing her financial acumen and practical suggestions. From initial wariness, their relationship had evolved into a cautious partnership born of shared trauma and mutual respect. "That seems sensible," she agreed, "though I imagine some of the local cattle operations won't be pleased about a mine opening in the valley." Reed smiled slightly. "Change is inevitable out here. The frontier isn't what it was even 5 years ago. Railroads, telegraphs, more settlers every month. We adapt or we disappear." He paused, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "Which brings me to another matter I've been meaning to discuss with you." Eliza felt a sudden flutter of anticipation, though she kept her expression neutral. "Oh, your plans," Reed clarified. "Spring will be here in a month or so. Travel will be possible again. You mentioned staying until then, but I wondered if you've given thought to what comes after." The question wasn't unexpected. Eliza had been contemplating her future almost daily, weighing options and possibilities. The trust fund Thomas had left her provided freedom to choose. She could return east, perhaps to Philadelphia, where Margaret had offered her a place to stay. Or she could remain in Montana Territory, possibly in Wolf Creek itself, where the small school was in need of a teacher. Or she could stay at the ranch, working alongside Reed as they developed both the cattle operation and the new mining venture. This last option had occupied her thoughts with increasing frequency, though she hesitated to acknowledge why. "I've considered several possibilities," she said carefully. "The trust fund Thomas established gives me options I didn't have when I first traveled west." Reed nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "Of course, you're a capable woman with many talents. You could build a good life wherever you choose." He hesitated before continuing. "But I hope you'll consider remaining here at Blackwood Reed Ranch." "In what capacity?" Eliza asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly. Reed shifted slightly, the first sign of discomfort she'd seen from him in this conversation. "Initially, as our bookkeeper and business manager, you've already proven your value in that regard." He took a breath. "But eventually, perhaps in a more permanent arrangement." The words hung between them, their implication clear yet deliberately ambiguous. Reed was offering a possibility, not a proposal, leaving room for her to define the relationship's boundaries. "That's a generous offer," Eliza said slowly, "but I wouldn't want anything decided out of mere convenience or gratitude." Reed's expression softened. "Eliza," he said, the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Montgomery, "attached. Nothing about my suggestion stems from convenience. These past weeks watching you face danger and grief with such courage and dignity. Getting to know your mind, your heart." He trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. "We barely know each other," Eliza pointed out gently. "I knew Tom all my life," Reed countered, "and he chose you from hundreds of possibilities. He saw something in you through your letters, intelligence, resilience, compassion, qualities I've now witnessed firsthand." His voice grew quieter. "I'm not asking for promises, only that you consider staying, giving us time to discover if there might be something worth building between us." The proposal, tentative as it was, touched Eliza more deeply than she had expected. There was an honesty in Reed's approach. No flowery declarations, no pressure, simply an acknowledgement of potential and a request for time to explore it. "I appreciate your candor," she said finally, "and yes, I will consider it." She allowed herself a small smile. "Though I'll need to be convinced that your interests aren't solely in my bookkeeping abilities." Reed's answering smile transformed, his usually serious features. "I suspect I can provide that reassurance, given the opportunity." Their moment was interrupted by Mrs. Larson announcing lunch, and the conversation shifted to more practical matters as they made their way to the dining room. Yet something had changed between them. A door opened to possibilities neither had anticipated when Eliza first arrived at the snow-covered ranch. Later that afternoon, Eliza found herself on the porch, bundled against the cold, but savoring a rare break in the clouds that allowed weak sunlight to glitter across the pristine landscape. Nathaniel Archer joined her, lighting his pipe as he leaned against the railing. "Beautiful country," he commented, "harsh, but honest in its way." "Yes," Eliza agreed. "Not what I expected when I left Boston, but I've grown to appreciate its particular charms." Archer studied her with the perceptive gaze that made him exceptional at his profession. "Reed asked you to stay," he stated rather than questioned. Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Does anything escape your notice, Mr. Archer?" He chuckled, a rare sound from the normally serious detective. "Observation is my livelihood, Miss Montgomery, and the way Reed watches you when he thinks no one is looking would be obvious to someone far less observant than myself." A flush that had nothing to do with the cold crept up Eliza's cheeks. "Perhaps your observations are colored by romantic notions uncommon in your profession." "Perhaps," Archer conceded, tapping his pipe against the railing. "But I've investigated enough human behavior to recognize genuine regard when I see it. Reed is a good man who's known his share of hardship. He deserves happiness." He paused meaningfully. as do you. Life rarely concerns itself with what we deserve, Eliza remarked, gazing out over the snow-covered valley. True enough, Archer nodded. Which is why we must seize opportunities for joy when they present themselves, however unexpected their form or timing. He straightened, preparing to return inside. Something to consider as you make your decision. Left alone with her. Thoughts? Eliza reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. She had traveled west to marry a man she knew only through letters, only to find him murdered and herself stranded among strangers. Yet in the space of a few turbulent weeks, those strangers had become not quite family, but something approaching. It Mrs. Larson with her gruff efficiency and unexpected kindness, Sheriff Walker and his dogged pursuit of justice, Archer with his keen insights and quiet wisdom, and Reed, complex, steadfast Reed, whose initial suspicion had evolved into respect and now something that might, given time, deepen into love. Thomas had promised her a new beginning in Montana. Though not in the way either of them had envisioned, perhaps that promise would still be fulfilled. The setting sun painted the snow-covered mountains with hues of pink and gold, a spectacular display that seemed offered for her alone. In that moment of solitary beauty, Eliza made her decision. She would stay, not because she lacked options or feared change, but because for the first time since arriving, she felt the stirrings of genuine belonging. Spring would bring new challenges, Margaret's visit, negotiations with mining companies, decisions about the ranch's future direction. But it would also bring green grass to the valley, calves to the herd, and the chance to build something meaningful from the tragedy that had marked her arrival. As darkness fell, Eliza caught the reflection of lamplight in the window. Reed moving. About the parlor, stoking the fire against the evening chill. Watching him, she felt a sense of rightness, of possibilities waiting to unfold. The path ahead was uncertain, but no longer frightening. Tomorrow she would tell him her decision. Tonight she would savor the quiet certainty that had settled in her heart, as enduring as the mountains that stood sentinel over the valley she was beginning to call home. April brought the first genuine thaw to Wolf Creek Valley. Snow retreated, up the mountainsides, revealing tender shoots of new grass beneath. Creeks swelled with meltwater, their surfaces glittering in strengthening sunlight. The ranch awakened from its winter dormancy as cattle were moved to fresh pastures, and repairs commenced on structures damaged by the harsh season. Eliza stood on the porch, savoring the warm breeze that carried hints of pine and damp earth. 3 months had passed since she'd first arrived at Blackwood Reed Ranch, a mail-order bride with modest expectations and practical ambitions. The woman who now surveyed the bustling activity of the ranch yard bore little resemblance to that cautious traveler. Her face had tanned slightly from outdoor work. Her hands had grown accustomed to tasks beyond ledger entries and correspondence, and her spirit had found an unexpected resilience in this wild country. The stage from Helena, just past Wilson's. Greek, Mrs. Larson announced, joining her on the porch, should arrive within the hour. Eliza nodded, smoothing her skirt nervously. Is everything prepared for our guest? The blue room is ready, fresh flowers on the table, and I've prepared a proper Eastern dinner, Mrs. Larson confirmed. Over the past months, the housekeeper had thawed considerably toward Eliza, their initial formality evolving into something approaching friendship. Though I doubt even my best efforts will match Philadelphia standards. I'm sure it will be perfect, Eliza assured her. From Margaret's letters, she seems quite eager to experience genuine frontier hospitality. The impending arrival of Thomas's sister had occupied much of Eliza's thoughts in recent days. Their correspondence had grown increasingly warm, united by shared grief and curiosity about one another. Margaret Blackwood Wells, 10 years Thomas's senior and now in her 40s, had expressed no interest in selling her inherited share of the ranch. Instead, she seemed genuinely invested in understanding the place her brother had chosen to build his life and legacy. The sound of hoofbeats drew Eliza's attention. Samuel Reed rode into the yard, returning from his morning inspection of the North Valley property, where preparations for the coal mining operation were underway. He dismounted with the easy grace of a lifelong horseman, though Eliza noted he still favored his left arm slightly, a lingering reminder of the confrontation with Richard Porter. Their eyes met across the yard, and Reed's expression softened into the smile he seemed to reserve exclusively for her. In the 2 months since their conversation in the study, their relationship had developed with cautious deliberation. Reed had been true to his word, applying no pressure beyond occasional invitations to ride alongside him as he worked the property, or to share private dinners where they gradually revealed their histories, hopes, and philosophies. Eliza had come to appreciate his quiet strength, wry humor, and unwavering integrity. The initial wariness she'd felt toward him had transformed into respect, then affection, and finally an emotion she was not yet ready to name, but which quickened her pulse whenever he entered a room. "How are the preparations at the north site?" she called as he approached the porch. "On schedule," Reed replied, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. "The surveyors from Montana Coal and Mineral finished marking the initial excavation points. They're confident we can begin extraction by midsummer." He glanced toward the road. "Any sign of Margaret's stage?" "Mrs. Larson says it's just past." "Wilson's Creek," Eliza answered. "Should arrive shortly." Reed nodded, a flicker of tension crossing his features. "I'd better clean up then. Make a proper impression on Tom's sister." Eliza caught his arm gently as he turned to enter the house. "She's not coming to judge us, Samuel. Her letters indicate she's simply curious about the place Thomas loved." Reed's expression remained troubled. "Still, I can't help feeling she'll hold me responsible for not protecting him. I was his partner, his oldest friend. I should have recognized the danger Porter posed." This recurring thread of guilt had surfaced periodically in Reed's darkest moments. Eliza had come to recognize it as part of his nature, the same sense of responsibility that made him an excellent ranch manager also led him to assume burdens beyond his control. "Thomas made his own choices," she reminded him softly. "He kept his suspicions private, even from you, until it was too late. Margaret understands that. She doesn't blame you." Reed covered her hand with his, the simple contact conveying gratitude beyond words. "You always know how to settle my thoughts," he murmured. "What would I do without your steady presence?" The question hung between them, layered with meaning neither was quite ready to address directly. Eliza withdrew her hand with gentle reluctance. "Go change," she instructed with a smile. "Margaret's stage will be here any minute." An hour later, the Blackwood Reed Ranch welcomed its distinguished visitor. Margaret Blackwood Wells proved to be a handsome woman of medium height, her brown hair streaked with dignified silver, her features bearing a notable resemblance to her late brother. She carried herself with the poise of Philadelphia society, but displayed none of the condescension Eliza had secretly feared. "So this is the place that captured my brother's heart," Margaret remarked, as Reed concluded a tour of the main house. "I see its appeal more clearly now. There's a freedom here, a sense of possibility that's quite intoxicating after the constraints of eastern cities." "Thomas spoke often of his fondness for the open spaces," Eliza offered. "In his letters, he described the valley as breathing room for the soul." Margaret's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "That sounds exactly like him, always the poet beneath his practical exterior." She turned to Reed. "He wrote of you frequently." "As well, Mr. Reed, the brother of my choosing, he called you." Reed's composure faltered momentarily. "He was the best man I've ever known," he said quietly. "Not a day passes that I don't feel his absence. Yet his presence remains in what you've built together." Margaret observed, gesturing toward the window where the ranch spread before them. "And in what you continue to build." Her gaze shifted meaningfully between Reed and Eliza, a knowing smile touching her lips. Dinner that evening was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Mrs. Larson had outdone herself with roast pheasant, spring, vegetables, and an apple pie that drew extravagant praise from their guest. As the meal progressed, Margaret shared stories of Thomas's childhood, his early fascination with maps and distant places, his determination to master any challenge, his quiet generosity toward those in need. "He was always searching," Margaret reflected as Mrs. Larson served coffee. "Not restless exactly, but seeking something he couldn't quite articulate. When his letters from Montana began, I knew immediately he'd found it." There was a contentment in his words that had been absent before. "We felt we were building something meaningful here," Reed acknowledged. "A legacy that might outlast us," Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "And now that legacy includes this extraordinary coal discovery." Thomas would have appreciated the irony that in death he provided even greater opportunities than he could in life. The following days established a pleasant routine. Mornings were devoted to business, reviewing the ranch accounts with Margaret, discussing the pending agreement with Montana Coal and Mineral, and addressing correspondence that had accumulated during the winter isolation. Afternoons often found them riding the property, with Reed proudly displaying the improvements he and Thomas had implemented over the years and outlining plans for future development. Margaret proved to be astute in business matters, asking penetrating questions about the mining contract and offering valuable suggestions based on her husband's experience with similar ventures in Pennsylvania. She also took genuine interest in the cattle operation, recognizing its importance beyond the more lucrative coal extraction. On their fifth evening together, after Reed had excused himself to check on a cow struggling with a difficult calving, Margaret joined Eliza in the parlor with a small wooden box. "I brought some items I thought you might appreciate," she explained, settling beside Eliza on the sofa. "Things that belonged to Thomas, that help complete the picture of who he was." From the box, she withdrew a daguerreotype of Thomas as a boy, standing proudly beside his father. Next came a small, worn book of poetry, Wordsworth, the pages marked, with notes in Thomas's neat hand, a pocket watch that had belonged to their grandfather, a pressed flower preserved between sheets of waxed paper. "He sent me this from your valley," Margaret explained, indicating the flower. "His first summer here. Said it was a species he'd never encountered before, that bloomed briefly after the snow melted." Eliza recognized the delicate purple blossom that carpeted certain meadows in early spring. "They're appearing now, actually, in the eastern pasture particularly." "I'd like to see them tomorrow," Margaret said, replacing the items in the box. She hesitated before continuing. "There's something else I've been meaning to discuss with you, Eliza. Something rather personal." Eliza tensed slightly, uncertain of the conversation's direction. "Of course," Margaret's expression grew solemn. "When Thomas wrote that he had advertised for a wife, I confess I was skeptical. It seemed so unlike him to approach marriage in such a pragmatic fashion." She smiled softly. "But then he began sharing your letters, and I understood. He found in your correspondence the same qualities I've observed in you these past days: intelligence, fortitude, and a certain clear-eyed approach to life that mirrored his own." "You've been very kind," Eliza murmured, touched by the assessment. "It's not kindness, merely observation," Margaret countered. "Which brings me to my point. Thomas would have wanted you to find happiness, Eliza, not just security or purpose, but genuine joy." Her gaze grew pointed. "The kind I suspect you're discovering with Samuel Reed." Heat rushed to Eliza's cheeks. "We've become friends," she acknowledged carefully. "Partners in managing the ranch business. Nothing has been decided beyond that. But your heart has decided, hasn't it?" Margaret pressed gently. "I see the way you look at him when his attention is elsewhere, the same way he watches you. The perceptiveness of the observation left Eliza momentarily speechless. Her feelings for Reed had deepened steadily over the past months, evolving from cautious respect to something far more profound. Yet, acknowledging those emotions, even to herself, felt somehow disloyal to Thomas's memory. "I came here to marry your brother," she said finally, "to build a life with him." "And fate intervened," Margaret replied. "But Thomas would never have wanted his memory to prevent your happiness. That's not who he was." She reached for Eliza's hand. "I didn't come here solely to see my brother's ranch or to assess the coal discovery. I came to meet the woman he chose and to assure myself of her well-being." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. "I wish I could have known him," she whispered. "Beyond his letters." "So do I," Margaret agreed, "but I find comfort knowing his final choice was to bring you here, to this place, to these people who have become your family. There's a rightness in that, don't you think? A completion of what he intended, though not in the way any of us expected." Later that night, unable to sleep, Eliza slipped outside to walk beneath a sky ablaze with stars. The spring air carried a hint of lingering chill, but nothing like the bitter cold of her arrival months earlier. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and made her way toward the eastern pasture, where the purple flowers Margaret had mentioned were beginning to bloom. The sound of footsteps behind her caused her to turn. Reed approached, his expression questioning in the moonlight. "I saw you from my window," he explained. "Couldn't sleep either." Eliza shook her head. "Too many thoughts circling. Margaret had some insights that left me restless." Reed fell into step beside her as they continued toward the pasture. "She's a remarkable woman. I see much of Tom in her. That same perceptiveness, the ability to understand people beyond what they show the world." "Yes," Eliza agreed. "She seems to see things quite clearly." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the edge of the pasture where, even in the moonlight, patches of purple were visible among the new grass. Reed stopped, turning to face her directly. "Eliza," he began, his voice low and earnest, "these past months have been transformative. When you first arrived, I was consumed with grief and suspicion. I couldn't see beyond the immediate crisis." He took a breath. "But you, your strength, your clarity of thought, your compassion, you've helped me remember there's more to life than survival. There's building, growing, connecting." Eliza's heart quickened at his words and the intensity behind them. "Samuel!" "Please," he interrupted gently, "let me finish while my courage holds." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking for promises yet. It's still too soon, and there's Thomas's memory between us. But I want you to know that my feelings have grown beyond friendship or convenient partnership. When I think of the future, this ranch, the coal venture, the life ahead, I can't imagine it without you beside me." The simple declaration, devoid of flowery sentiment but filled with genuine emotion, moved Eliza deeply. In Reed's steady gaze, she saw not the mythical frontier hero of dime novels, nor the suspicious partner she'd first encountered, but a man of substance, flawed, complex, and utterly real. "Margaret said Thomas would want me to find happiness," she said softly. "And have you?" Reed asked, vulnerability evident beneath the question. "Found happiness here?" Eliza considered the journey that had brought her to this moment, from Boston's rigid society to this wild, beautiful country, from practical resignation to genuine purpose, from the safe harbor of correspondence to the unpredictable waters of actual connection. "Yes," she answered simply, "not as I expected, but perhaps deeper for that very reason." Reed's expression lightened, hoping to replace uncertainty. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, Eliza felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Not the closure of a chapter, but the opening of a new volume, one filled with possibilities she could never have envisioned when she stepped off the train at Wolf Creek Station. "In the autumn," Reed said quietly, "after we've had time to know each other fully to be certain, would you consider making this arrangement permanent?" The proposal, tentative as it was, acknowledged both their growing feelings and the respect due to Thomas's memory. It was perfectly Reed, thoughtful, honorable, and mindful of the complex circumstances that had brought them together. "Yes," Eliza replied, certainty filling her voice. "In the autumn." They returned to the house hand in hand, their path illuminated by stars and the promise of a shared future neither had anticipated. Behind them, the purple flowers Thomas had sent to his sister years earlier continued their brief, beautiful blooming, symbols of resilience and renewal in a land where both were necessary for survival. From the parlor window, Margaret watched their approach with quiet satisfaction. Her brother's final gift had been bringing Eliza to this remote valley. Though he couldn't have foreseen the tragic circumstances that would unfold, his choice had ultimately led to this moment of connection and possibility. As spring strengthened its hold on Wolf Creek Valley, the Blackwood Reed Ranch prepared for transformation. The cattle operation would continue, expanded by Reed's careful management. The coal mine would bring prosperity and change to the region. And at the heart of it all, a partnership born of tragedy but sustained by genuine affection would grow into something Thomas himself would have celebrated. Not a replacement for what might have been, but a new creation entirely, built on the foundation he had helped establish. For Eliza Montgomery, the mail-order bride who arrived to find her groom dead, life had taken an unimaginable turn. Yet as she entered the warm house with Reed beside her and Margaret waiting to greet them, she felt an overwhelming sense of having found her place at last. Not through the marriage she had anticipated, but through the unexpected journey that had tested her resilience, challenged her perceptions, and ultimately led her home. September painted Wolf Creek Valley in rich autumnal hues. Golden aspens, russet underbrush, and deep green pines standing sentinel against the increasingly crisp air. The cattle had been moved to lower pastures in preparation for the coming winter, their coats already thickening against the seasonal change. The Blackwood Reed Ranch had transformed dramatically since spring. Construction of the coal processing facility in the North Valley was well underway, bringing an influx of workers and equipment that contrasted sharply with the pastoral rhythm of ranch life. A narrow-gauge railway spur now extended from the main Northern Pacific line to the extraction site, its freshly laid tracks cutting through meadows where cattle had once grazed undisturbed. Change had come to the main house as well. The study had expanded into a proper office with the addition of a second desk, where Eliza managed the increasingly complex financial operations. The parlor had been refreshed with new curtains and upholstery, softening its masculine austerity. The kitchen garden had flourished under Mrs. Larson's and Eliza's combined attention, yielding abundant vegetables that now filled the root cellar for winter. Most significantly, the ranch itself had been legally restructured. Following Margaret's return to Philadelphia, lengthy telegrams and letters had flown between Montana and Pennsylvania, culminating in a formal partnership agreement. Reed maintained his original half-interest, while Margaret and Eliza now shared equally in what had been Thomas's portion. The arrangement recognized both Margaret's inheritance rights and Eliza's growing contribution to the ranch's operations. On this particular golden afternoon, Eliza stood at the edge of the east pasture, surveying the valley that had become home. 6 months earlier, she could never have imagined the direction her life would take. From a dispossessed banker's daughter to respected businesswoman with a significant stake in a thriving enterprise. The sound of an approaching wagon drew her attention. It was Reed, returning from Wolf Creek with supplies and, presumably, the special package she had been anticipating from Philadelphia. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, a reaction that had only strengthened with time and deepening acquaintance. Successful. "Trip!" she called as he drew the wagon to a halt beside her. Reed's face brightened with the smile he reserved solely for her. "Very. Got everything on Mrs. Larson's list, plus something special from back east." He reached beneath the wagon seat and extracted a carefully wrapped parcel. Margaret's wedding gift arrived on today's train. Eliza accepted the package with a mixture of excitement and reverence. In 3 days, she and Reed would be married in the small Wolf Creek church, with Mrs. Larson, Sheriff Walker, and a handful of neighboring ranchers as witnesses. The ceremony would be simple by Eastern standards, but perfectly suited to their circumstances and preferences. "Let's open it together at the house," she suggested, allowing Reed to help her onto the wagon seat beside him. As they drove toward the ranch buildings, Reed updated her on town news. "The new school teacher arrived yesterday, Miss Collins from Minnesota. Seems capable, though rather shocked by frontier conditions." He chuckled. "Sheriff Walker's already sweet on her, if you ask me." Couldn't stop stuttering when he introduced himself. Eliza smiled at the image. The gruff sheriff had become a true friend in the months since Thomas's murder, stopping by the ranch regularly to check on their welfare and share meals. The idea of him flustered by a prim schoolteacher was endearing. "And the coal company representatives?" she inquired, knowing Reed had met with them during his visit to town. His expression grew more serious. "Production estimates exceed their initial projections. They're talking about doubling the workforce by spring." He glanced at her. "It will change the valley, Eliza. More than we anticipated." She nodded, understanding his ambivalence. The coal discovery promised financial security beyond anything they might have achieved through ranching alone. Yet both felt a certain nostalgia for the quieter life that was rapidly disappearing. "We'll adapt," she assured him, touching his arm lightly. "Guide the changes as best we can to preserve what matters most." Reed's hand covered hers briefly. "Your practical optimism never fails to steady me," he said, affection evident in his tone. "How did I manage before you arrived?" "Poorly, according to Mrs. Larson," Eliza teased. "She says you were positively feral." His laughter echoed across the valley as they approached the ranch house, where Mrs. Larson awaited on the porch, clearly eager to see the supplies and hear the town gossip. Later, after the wagon had been unloaded and dinner preparations begun, Reed and Eliza retreated to the parlor to open Margaret's gift. The package revealed an exquisite silver tea service, a 4-piece set of teapot, sugar bowl, creamer and waste bowl, each piece decorated with delicate engravings of mountain landscapes. "It's beautiful," Eliza breathed, running her finger along the finely crafted handle of the teapot, and remarkably appropriate, Reed observed, examining the engraved mountain scene, almost as if she commissioned it specifically with Wolf Creek Valley in mind. Tucked beneath the silver pieces was a letter in Margaret's elegant hand. Eliza unfolded it and read aloud, "My dear Eliza and Samuel, this tea service has been in the Blackwood family for 3 generations. Our grandfather brought it west from Boston when he settled in Pennsylvania, and it has graced our family table through celebrations and sorrows alike. I can think of no more fitting custodians than the 2 of you as you build upon the foundation Thomas helped establish in your Montana home. Though I cannot attend your wedding in person, please know I am with you in spirit. The love you have, found amid such tragedy, would bring Thomas joy, not sorrow. He valued authenticity above all else, and would recognize the genuine bond between you as something to be celebrated, not hidden out of misplaced loyalty to his memory. The silver will tarnish if unused. Similarly, life's opportunities dim when preserved rather than embraced. Use this gift often, fill it with warmth to be shared, and remember that family extends beyond blood to encompass those we choose to love and trust. With deepest affection and brightest hopes for your future together. Margaret Eliza's voice faltered slightly as she finished reading. Reed moved closer, his arm encircling her waist in silent support and shared emotion. She has a way with words, he said softly, much like Tom did. Yes, Eliza agreed, carefully refolding the letter. I'm grateful for her blessing. It means more than I expected. They sat together in companionable silence, the tea service gleaming in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. Outside, ranch hands were returning from their day's work, the familiar sounds of horses and men's voices creating a comforting backdrop to their moment of quiet intimacy. I've been thinking, Reed said eventually, his voice thoughtful. About names. Eliza tilted her head questioningly. Names? For the ranch, he clarified. After we're married, Blackwood Reed was right for Tom and me, but now... He hesitated. Now it feels like we're building something new on what came before, something that honors the past while acknowledging the present. The sentiment mirrored Eliza's own feelings so precisely that she felt a renewed surge of connection with this man who had moved from stranger to partner in the span of 9 transformative months. What did you have in mind? She asked. Blackwood Valley, Reed suggested. Simple, respectful of Tom's legacy, but not tied solely to the two of us as individuals. A name that can encompass the ranch, the coal operation, whatever else might develop here over time. Eliza considered the suggestion, testing it in her mind. Blackwood Valley, she repeated. Yes, I think Thomas would approve. And you? Reed pressed, his gaze seeking confirmation that the choice resonated with her as well. I do, she assured him. It feels right, acknowledging where we began without constraining what we might become. Reed's smile conveyed relief and gratitude for her understanding. It was one of countless moments over recent months that had confirmed their compatibility, their ability to navigate complex emotional terrain with mutual respect and consideration. As sunset approached, they walked together to Thomas's grave, in the small ranch cemetery established on a gentle rise overlooking the valley. It had become their custom to visit weekly, a practice that had evolved from obligation to meaningful ritual. Reed had crafted a handsome stone marker, and Eliza kept the site adorned with seasonal wildflowers or evergreen boughs. Standing before the grave, Eliza felt the familiar mixture of sadness for what might have been and gratitude for what had emerged from loss. She placed fresh autumn flowers beside the headstone while Reed stood respectfully nearby, hat in hand. We're renaming the ranch Blackwood Valley, she said softly, addressing the silent stone. A fitting tribute, I think, to the vision you and Samuel created here. Reed stepped forward, adding his own quiet words. We've finalized the coal contract, Tom. Everything is properly documented, just as you would have insisted. The terms are favorable. The ranch operations remain protected and development will be limited to the North Valley section. Their one-sided conversation might have seemed peculiar to outsiders, but it provided comfort and continuity as they navigated the transition from grieving Thomas's death to celebrating their shared future. After a respectful moment of silence, they turned back toward the house, now illuminated with warm lamplight against the gathering dusk. The autumn chill had deepened, prompting Reed to wrap his arm around Eliza's shoulders as they walked. 3 days, he murmured, a note of wonder in his voice. 3 days until you're my wife. Eliza leaned into his embrace, savoring the solidity of his presence. Not quite the path either of us anticipated, she observed. Yet here we are. Reed stopped, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his features were softened, but his eyes remained intense. Eliza Montgomery, he said, taking both her hands in his. When you stepped off that train 9 months ago, the world was covered in snow and shadow. I never imagined that spring would bring more than just thawing ground. The simple poetry of his statement touched her deeply. Samuel Reed was not a man given to flowery declarations, which made his occasional eloquence all the more meaningful. Life unfolds in unexpected patterns, she replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. The trick, it seems, is recognizing the gift within the challenge. Reed drew her closer, his kiss a promise of the partnership they had built and the future they would craft together. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of evening, witnesses to a love neither had sought, but both now treasured beyond measure. As darkness settled fully over Blackwood Valley, they returned to the warmth of the house that had become their shared home. The tea service from Margaret gleamed on the parlour table, a tangible link between past and future. Mrs. Larson hummed in the kitchen as she prepared dinner, her initial wariness long since replaced by genuine affection for the woman who had arrived as Thomas intended and would soon be Reed's wife. Autumn's golden light would soon give way to winter's crystal clarity. Then spring would return again, bringing new growth to the valley and new possibilities to the life Eliza and Reed were building together. The cycle would continue, as it had since long before humans inhabited this wild, beautiful country. A rhythm of renewal that promised continuity, even amid life's most unexpected turns. 5 years had transformed Blackwood Valley beyond recognition. What had once been a remote cattle ranch was now the center of a thriving community. The coal mine operated at full capacity, employing over 100 men. A small settlement had sprung up nearby, first tents, then proper buildings. A company store, boarding houses, even a schoolhouse for the miners' children. Through careful management and foresight, Reed and Eliza had guided this growth to preserve the original character of the ranch, while embracing inevitable change. The cattle operation continued, though on a reduced scale, maintaining the connection to the land that had first drawn Thomas and Reed to Montana. On this particular summer morning, Eliza stood on the front porch, watching her 3-year-old son, Thomas Reed, chase butterflies across the yard. His dark hair and serious expression reminded her daily of his namesake, though his laugh was pure Samuel, full-throated and uninhibited. "He's going to wear himself out before the guests arrive," Reed observed, joining her on the porch. He slipped an arm around her waist, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. "That might be for the best," Eliza replied with a smile. "Margaret won't mind if he naps through part of her visit. She'll have a week to spoil him properly." The afternoon train would bring Thomas's sister for her annual summer stay, a tradition begun after Eliza and Reed's wedding. Each year, Margaret spent a month at Blackwood Valley, delighting in her nephew's growth and maintaining the family connection that had become precious to all of them. "The Walkers are coming for dinner tomorrow as well," Reed reminded her. "Emily promised to bring her apple cake that little Thomas loves." Eliza nodded, pleased at the thought. Sheriff Walker, now Mayor Walker, had indeed fallen for the schoolteacher Miss Collins. Their marriage 3 years ago had been a joyous community celebration, second only to the birth of Thomas Reed in uniting the growing settlement. "Is Nathaniel still planning to join us next week?" she asked, referring to Nathaniel Archer, who had remained a friend and occasional business consultant since the resolution of Thomas's murder. "His telegram confirmed it," Reed replied. "Says he has news too important to share by wire." He raised an eyebrow. "Any guesses?" Eliza laughed. "With Nathaniel, it could be anything from retirement to a new position with the federal government. He's never been predictable." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a coal company wagon. The driver tipped his hat respectfully as he approached the porch. "Morning, Mr. Reed, Mrs. Reed. Got those documents you requested from the Denver office." Reed accepted the package with thanks, and the driver departed after declining an offer of refreshment. Inside the thick envelope were the finalized contracts for the northern expansion, a project that would extend the coal operation while establishing a permanent conservation area along Wolf Creek itself. The agreement represented months of negotiation and reflected the balanced approach Eliza and Reed had maintained throughout Blackwood Valley's development. "Everything looks in order," Eliza confirmed after they reviewed the documents together in the study that had long since become their shared workspace. "Margaret will be pleased, especially about the nature preserve. It was her suggestion originally." Reed nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Tom would have approved too. He always said we were stewards, not owners, that the land would outlast us all." Their mutual respect for Thomas's memory had evolved over the years from cautious reverence to comfortable appreciation. His presence remained in the ranch's foundation, in the values that guided their decisions, and most tangibly, in the curious little boy who bore his name. Yet there was no shadow over the life Eliza and Reed had built together, only gratitude for the unexpected path that had led them to each other. After settling young Thomas for his afternoon nap under Mrs. Larson's watchful eye, Eliza changed into a fresh dress for their trip to the station. The elegant simplicity of her attire reflected the balance she had struck between frontier practicality and her Boston upbringing. Much like Blackwood Valley itself, balanced tradition with progress. As Reed helped her into the carriage, he paused, his expression growing thoughtful. "I've been thinking about something Tom said once, in our early days here. We were standing on that ridge overlooking the valley, exhausted from clearing land, and he said, 'Someday, this empty place will be filled with life and purpose.'" Eliza squeezed his hand, understanding the significance of the memory. He was right, though perhaps not in the way he imagined. The drive to Wolf Creek Station, now a proper depot rather than the simple platform where Eliza had first arrived, took them past the evidence of Thomas's foresight. Fields stretched toward the mountains, interrupted by the occasional homestead. Mining equipment dotted the northern slopes, while cattle grazed the protected southern pastures. The town itself had grown from a single street to a modest grid of businesses and residences. "Do you ever wonder," Reed asked as they approached the station, "what might have happened if events had unfolded differently? If you had arrived to find Tom waiting for you that day?" It was a question they rarely addressed, though Eliza had considered it over the years. "I think we would have built a good life," she answered honestly. "Thomas and I were well matched in many ways. But it would have been a different life, not better or worse, simply different." Reed nodded, accepting her assessment without jealousy or regret. Their relationship had always been grounded in truth, even when that truth acknowledged complex emotions. "I'm grateful for the life we have," he said simply, "for our son, our work, our partnership, every day." The train whistle sounded in the distance as they arrived at the station. Soon Margaret would step onto the platform, arms open to embrace the family she had helped create through her understanding and blessing. Young Thomas would wake from his nap to find his beloved aunt bearing gifts and stories from the east. Nathaniel Archer would arrive with his mysterious news. Mayor and Mrs. Walker would share their company and apple cake, and life would continue its rich unfolding. As the train rounded the final bend toward the station, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had left Boston as a mail-order bride, practical and resigned, seeking security in a marriage of convenience with a stranger known only through letters. Instead, tragedy had redirected her path, leading her through mystery and danger to an unexpected love and a purpose that fulfilled her in ways she could never have anticipated. The valley that had first appeared to her snow-covered and forbidding now bloomed with summer's abundance and human endeavor. The house that had witnessed Thomas's absence now echoed with his namesake's laughter, and the woman who had arrived alone, her future uncertain, now stood firmly rooted in a life rich with meaning and connection. "Here comes the train," Reed said, helping Eliza down from the carriage. She smoothed her skirt and straightened her hat, ready to welcome Margaret to Blackwood Valley once again. As the train slowed to a stop amid clouds of steam and the squeal of brakes, Eliza felt the familiar surge of gratitude for all that had emerged from that fateful winter day when she had arrived to find her groom dead and began the unexpected journey that had led her home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.